There's a specific moment that happens to almost everyone who crosses six figures in net worth, and it has nothing to do with money at all. It's the moment you stop checking your bank balance before you buy something. Not because you suddenly have unlimited funds, but because some quiet part of your brain has decided you've made it, and making it means you no longer need to look. That single shift in behavior, that tiny withdrawal of attention, is where almost every post-100K financial disaster actually begins. Not in a market crash, not in a bad investment, in the moment you stopped paying attention to the thing that got you there in the first place. My name is Daniel, and I want to walk you through what actually happens to people after they cross that first big milestone, because it's rarely the number itself that trips people up. It's what the number does to their behavior in the months that follow. Let me tell you about a guy I'll call Marcus, because his story is close to 100 conversations I've had with people at almost exactly this stage. Marcus hit $100,000 in net worth at 29. Not a huge salary, nothing flashy, just 5 years of consistent saving, an index fund, and a habit of not thinking too hard about money, because thinking too hard about money used to be stressful. The night he crossed the number, he didn't do anything dramatic. He just looked at the total, felt something loosen in his chest, and quietly decided he'd earned the right to stop being so careful. That's the whole mistake, right there, before a single dollar even moved. Not a purchase, a permission slip he wrote himself. Here's the part almost nobody talks about. Crossing $100,000 doesn't change your financial situation nearly as much as it changes your relationship to attention. Below that number, most people check their accounts constantly, almost anxiously, because the number still feels fragile, like it could disappear if they looked away. Above it, the checking slows down. The number starts to feel solid, permanent, like furniture instead of weather. And that's exactly backwards from how wealth actually behaves at this stage, because $100,000 is still small enough that a handful of bad months can undo years of good ones. And it's also exactly big enough to start attracting expensive attention from other people. 3 weeks after his milestone, Marcus upgraded his apartment. Not because he needed to, but because a friend mentioned a nicer building near the train, and Marcus caught himself thinking, I can afford that now, which was technically true and functionally irrelevant, because the question was never whether he could afford it. The question was what else that money could have quietly become. The new place cost $340 more a month than his old one. On its own, that sounds forgettable, almost embarrassingly small to build a whole segment around. But run it forward. $340 a month invested at a typical long-run market return over 30 years turns into somewhere north of $400,000. One apartment upgrade, chosen in about 4 minutes of conversation with a friend, quietly erased the equivalent of a small pension. This is what I mean when I say lifestyle creep doesn't arrive as a decision. It arrives as a series of small permissions, each one so minor it doesn't feel worth defending against. Nobody sits down and decides to sacrifice $400,000 of future wealth for a slightly nicer kitchen. They just say yes to $340 a month once and never notice that the yes compounds just as aggressively as the savings did. Now here's where it gets more interesting, because the apartment wasn't even Marcus's biggest mistake. His biggest mistake was what happened to his portfolio itself, and it's a mistake so common at this exact wealth level that I'd bet a meaningful chunk of you watching this are doing it right now without knowing it. Marcus had 4 different places: a 401k through work, a Roth IRA he'd opened a few years earlier, a brokerage account he funded whenever he felt motivated, and a robo-advisor account he'd forgotten he even had. 4 accounts, and in his head, 4 different strategies, spread out, diversified, sophisticated even. He felt like someone who had his financial life handled. He didn't. When he finally sat down and pulled up every holding across all 4 accounts, he found that 3 of them were, in practice, the same portfolio wearing different outfits. Total market fund here, S&P 500 fund there, a growth fund in the robo account that turned out to be roughly 70% overlapping with the other 2. He wasn't diversified. He was paying 4 separate sets of fees, filling out 4 separate tax forms, and managing 4 separate logins to hold essentially one bet made 4 times. That's not diversification. That's clutter wearing the costume of strategy. And the real cost isn't just the redundant fees, though those add up. The real cost is that Marcus believed he was protected against risk he was actually fully exposed to. And that false confidence is exactly the kind of thing that gets people to stop paying attention at precisely the moment they should be paying more. If any of this is landing for you, this is usually the point in the video where I'd ask you to hit subscribe, so let me just say it plainly instead of dancing around it. If you want more of this kind of breakdown, the stuff that actually explains why people at your exact stage make the mistakes they make, subscribing genuinely helps, and I'd rather earn that from you honestly than beg for it awkwardly later. Let's talk about the third mistake, because this one is quieter than the other two, and in my opinion, more expensive over a lifetime. It's what happens to a person's relationship with risk once they've tasted a market that only ever went up. Marcus started investing during a stretch where the market mostly climbed, with a few scary dips that recovered fast. So by the time he hit $100,000, his internal model of how investing works had quietly become number goes down sometimes, then it goes back up, always. That belief isn't wrong exactly, but it's incomplete in a dangerous way because it strips out the emotional cost of living through a real downturn, the kind that takes 18 months to recover instead of 18 days. People who form their expectations during calm markets tend to take on more risk than they'd actually be comfortable holding through a genuinely bad stretch because they've never been tested, they've only been rewarded. And the first time the market punishes them instead of rewarding them, a huge number of these same disciplined, sensible savers panic sell at exactly the wrong moment, converting a temporary paper loss into a permanent real one, simply because their nervous system had never rehearsed for the real thing. Here's the broader pattern underneath all three of these mistakes, and I think it's the actual thesis of everything I want you to take from this video. Crossing $100,000 doesn't make you a more sophisticated investor, it makes you a more targeted one, and it makes you feel more sophisticated than you've actually become, which is far a more dangerous combination than simply being inexperienced. When you had $8,000, nobody was trying to sell you anything, and you had no illusions about having it figured out. At $100,000, you're suddenly eligible for premium credit offers. You qualify for advisors who wouldn't have returned your call a year earlier, and you've got just enough of a track record to convince yourself that your instincts are the reason it worked, rather than time and consistency doing the quiet, unglamorous work they always do. Marcus eventually caught most of this. He consolidated his overlapping funds into something genuinely diversified. He downgraded his apartment back down, not out of punishment, but because once he ran the actual 30-year math on that $340, the nicer kitchen stopped feeling worth it. And he started deliberately imagining a bad year, not to scare himself, but to find out in advance whether his risk tolerance was real or just untested. The version of him that exists now isn't more careful because he's scared. He's more careful because he finally understands that $100,000 was never the finish line he thought it was. It was the starting gun for a completely different set of temptations, ones that don't show up when you have nothing and only ever show up once you have something worth protecting. If you've made it this far, do me a favor and subscribe before you go, because I've got more of these breakdowns coming, and I'd genuinely like you to be here for them. But before you leave, I want to ask you something, and I actually want you to answer it in the comments rather than just nod along in your head. What's the first thing that changed about how you handled money the moment your savings crossed a number that felt significant to you? And looking back now, was that change actually a good one?